Parent's Perspective with Mike and Amy. I'm Mike Thomas, and with me is Amy Bishop, the co-host. And this program is part of an education series through the St. Clair County Speak Youth Coalition and is funded in part by Region 10 in partnership with the St. Clair County Health Department and local organizations in the Blue Water area. And last week we talked a little bit about the love languages we can use with our children. This week we want to talk about how we can handle disagreements using what we call fair fighting rules. And I know that can mean a lot of different things for folks. So Amy and I are going to give a few specifics that can really help you make sure that when we're talking with our children that we're modeling the right behavior, so that way we teach our children how to be better communicators. And so one of the first things we can do is, before we begin, we got to ask ourselves why we feel upset in the first place. What is the real issue that's going on? And I know sometimes there's those particular topics that just kind of bring a flood of emotions. Amy, what are those topics for you? Like, what are those things that at home, when we bring those things up, it's just like, it's going to be a flood of different ideas popping in our head?
Oh, there's a long list. I guess you could call it my pet peeve. I come home and I have nowhere to lay my things because the counter is full of clutter. So that gets my gander up. I think it's different for everybody, but I do think it's important to stay on focus on when you're going to have a disagreement or you confront someone, that you stick with the topic at hand and not remember all the past offenses and clump them all together. That's just not manageable and not fair, for sure.
That makes sense. Another one that's really important, and if we can really just focus in on, if we had to focus on one thing, I can say with my own family, is watching the language we use. We just talked about love language, but sometimes, and I can tell you this personally, when I feel disrespected, is I have a tough time being respectful myself, and that degrading language can be a real problem. So if we really got to watch just some of the things that we say. I know for me, it's put downs, or every once in a while I might say a bad word or two. Amy, what about you? Like, when you think of degrading language, what comes to mind for you?
Oh, for me, it's name calling. I absolutely despise that. I think that it is just rude. It and I think that it does harm that you can't undo, because that you kind of have an echo in your mind. Well, I'm stupid. I'm not worth anything. I'm never going to amount to anything. I'm an idiot. And those resonate with even adults as well as kids. So I think for our home, that is number one rule. And I have to say it all the time: no name calling, no name calling. And I think that even some discrimination can stem from that too. It starts with that name calling. And so it's just not respectful. I think it's inhumane, and it certainly doesn't show the ability to use the English language properly. So yeah, name calling is mine. Rule out. No name calling. First rule.
I don't know if a lot of people know this as well too, but there are cases where if that happens to that, what that really is in a lot of ways is emotional and verbal abuse, and that can actually be a criminal charge if you use that too much, depending on how you use it. So I'm glad you pointed that out, Amy, because there's a lot of different things that can just get us to the point where we feel like we're less than a person, and that really is a form of abuse. So as much as possible, never use negative language when you're having a discussion. In fact, it is important, though, that we express how we say things. So kind of the way I will express feelings is by just simply using the terms I feel. So, for example, if you're upset about something, I feel upset when people say these things to me. I feel nervous when people do this certain thing. I feel disrespected when you call me that name, and I want to feel respected. So when we put the focus on how we feel, we're not attacking. We're letting that person know where we're at with that situation and what the issue is versus attacking the person. I don't know. Amy, what are some ways that you express your feelings in a situation like that?
Well, I like what you said, Mike, about saying I. That is, even for me, difficult to remember, because the first thing I find myself jumping to is the first word is you do this and you did that and you forgot. And instead, I need to say, it makes me frustrated when you forget your lunch and then I have to worry about you being hungry all day. So I have to remember not to say you, and that's a toughie, but you're right, it changes the whole aura of the conversation if we start out with I, because it's from our perspective, and then go, and then hopefully that other person will come back and say, well, mom, I could do better if you remind me the night before, or whatever it is.
Makes sense. And the next one is, Amy, I got to admit, this is probably the one I'm the worst with, is taking turns talking. So I've got a
Oh,
feeling, oh yeah. Can you believe it, Amy?
oh, I have a hard time with that too. How do we ever figure the show out?
I know. And that's part of the problem is like when you're, if you're like me or, you know, I've got something I want to say and it's hard to get it out in a limited time when I've got so much I got to say. But truth of the matter is, when we don't take turns, we're telling the other person that what they've got to say is insignificant. And so one thing that can work is set a time limit. Like, for example, say, all right, I'm going to give you a minute to talk. I'm going to take a minute. And then if we need to, we take a little bit more time. But the important thing is we try to respect that time. Because what happens is, if you're like me, I have a tendency of like, once I get on a subject, got to keep going because what's in the head got to come out the mouth. And then that could, ask my wife, that could take forever. So I have to remember sometimes just to keep it to a minute and give the other person a chance. It's the same with the children. I know we're here for the children, so we pick on our spouses a lot, don't we, Amy? But the reality is the same as with our children. They're needing to learn what's appropriate timelines and appropriate ways to communicate. So we're that model. So we need to be able to show what that is ourselves and not just ourselves. Think that because we're mom or we're dad, that we can say what we want and then limit them.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. Absolutely. And I want to point out here, Mike, as you're talking, I'm thinking of other relationships in my life, not just from the parents' perspective on the show, but remember from their point of view, they're also watching what we model and how we conduct arguments ourselves with other people. So I think of, how I communicate with my mom or my dad. I'm the child in that relationship, and with my husband, or so we have to remember that all of these tips can be applied to many different relationships. So we're multifaceted people and our kids are watching.
Hey, speaking of bringing our parents in, this next one really fits the bill. Don't tell my mom. No stonewalling. See, I remember when my mom and I, when we'd be having a discussion and it didn't go so well, she'd be quiet for like 3 days. And I'm like, oh, it's almost like a fate worse than death, not hearing what's going on. You just really felt bad. And the reality of it is when people stonewall, whether they shut down communication and refuse to talk to you for a couple of days, or they storm out saying, you know what, I'm not talking with you, I'm leaving. That doesn't help communication. All that does is tell that other person you're done and you dictated what's going to happen. And anybody that's going to have to deal with that in most cases, especially if they're really heated, fight or flight kicks in. We're either going to get run away, angry, or we get scared. And when we do that to people, that just, I don't know about you, but oh man, that would get me going, Amy. Oh, you don't want to talk to me? Fine, I'll do the same thing back. And so we instead of being rational, we start using it as an attack mode. And I work with men in domestic violence situations. If you were to survey most of the men in there, one of the biggest reasons that led them to a domestic situation is they decided, I'm leaving. And then their partner gets in and steps in, and it just goes from there because the thought is, when are they coming back? Are they going to come back? And do they really care about me if they're not willing to listen to hear what I got to say by either being stubborn like this or just walking out? And that one of the worst things you can do is just refuse to talk. Silence is even more scary in communication than words.
I totally agree. It's very dismissive, and it shows that you don't care about the relationship. Now, taking a break to cool down is totally a different thing, where you can both agree to, cool down, collect your thoughts, and then agree to come back and talk about that again, to revisit that issue. But right, stonewalling, not fair.
Right. And I'm glad you pointed out that way too, Amy, because a lot of folks will ask, so what do I do when I get heated? I mean, maybe I do need a break. What do I do? It's simply put, just say, can we take 5 minutes? I know I'm feeling worked up. And if I could just go, get a drink of water, take a walk for a few minutes, come back. I'd really like to finish this up, but I really need a few minutes to clear my head. That's okay. Because what that's showing is that you realize that there's an issue going on with you, and you need that time to give them their proper focus. And that's the same for children. Encourage them. If sometimes it's harder with children because they're trying to figure out where they're placed in the world and what can I do as if mom and dad are just keep going. It's like, you know what, son, I can sense that you're having a difficult time right now. Why don't we take a few minutes? We'll come back. Let's breathe, and then we'll talk about this some more. What do you say? Give them a chance, and it's their decision at that point too if they need to take the break. And then they realize that you do want to hear, but maybe now's that's another thing too when it comes to fair. Pick the time. Like having a discussion right before they go to bed or first thing in the morning or the second you get home from work is probably not the best time to communicate for most people. So give them a few minutes and then come back and then we discuss it. And then the last thing is try to find a way to compromise or negotiate. Maybe there's some wiggle room. A lot of parents don't like doing that. Here's the reality of it. You can give your children options, but have some limitations with them as well too.
Well, Mike, it looks like we lost you for a second, so I will finish that up for you. And compromising is important, you know. Any relationship is a little bit of give and a little bit of take. And allowing and permitting your child to have some choices. Hi, Mike, you're
Hey,
back. Allows them to exercise some of their independence. And that's what we're trying to teach, right? Is independence. So compromising is an awesome way to, mutually agree to, you know what, you're a little bit right, I'm a little bit right, or maybe it's not even about being right, it's about something that they're going to do. But giving them that little bit of freedom could really benefit the relationship because then they feel loved, they feel like they're allowed to exercise some decision in their life, and maybe they'll give a little bit more next time for you. So I
yeah,
covered compromise. You kind of blipped out there on us for a little bit.
I
The
was going
only
to
thing
say,
I think we missed, Mike, was no yelling.
oh
So
yeah,
many
yeah,
times the volume in our houses has been turned way up where we're always raising our voices. And so I think, it's not about who's the loudest won the fight. It has to be, modeled that we use a regular tone. In fact, it's proven study if you talk softer, people or the other person starting to yell will start to lower their voice to your tone. So it takes a lot of self-control to exercise that. But I think that our homes will be more peaceful if we turn the volume down in general.
makes great sense, Amy. When children are looking to us to be the examples, we've got to be the right example. We could be the right example or the wrong example. So important we do that. And as much as possible, as we just learned from this technical difficulty, try as much as possible to have these conversations in person. But with that said, that's all the time we've got for today. So we wanted to thank you again for coming in. What we're hoping to do is next week have a special guest that comes in. We're going to talk about trauma and what are some of the aspects with that. But we really would love to see any questions or comments that you have. Feel free to add them in the post below. Don't forget, we're also available for information on Facebook. Keep following us on Instagram as well. And we thank you very much for watching. Have a great day.